Once, I was born as a prince of the Shakya clan. However, from the day I realized that neither status nor lineage has any bearing on enlightenment, I came to be known as the Awakened One, the Buddha, and now before me lies this era. The term critical race theory envelops society as if it were a religion, furthering the divide among people. It's a strange sight. Why does a theory aimed at eradicating discrimination end up increasing hatred in people's hearts? Here is my perspective. The greatest misunderstanding about critical race theory lies in its creation of an enemy. Of course, it's undeniable that racial biases and structural injustices exist. Yet every time the theory highlights a perpetrator versus victim framework, human hearts are drawn into a dichotomy of those who cause suffering versus those who endure suffering. This, undoubtedly, is the mind of separation. I once taught that all suffering originates from attachment. The moment we perceive the existence of an enemy, we have already set the stage for a battle within our hearts. In this video, I want to ask you, living in the modern world, if you truly wish to end discrimination, isn't a mindset that does not create enemies necessary? Is there a way to overcome social structures, historical debts, and personal struggles without denying them, yet without relying on anger and conflict? I intend to reframe this using the words egolessness and compassion. While defining an enemy may seem to highlight justice, I want to convey that defining someone as an enemy itself marks the beginning of new suffering. When people talk about discrimination, their hearts become unsettled. This isn't just a societal issue, it's a question about the very essence of one's existence. The spread of the term critical race theory is rooted in a long history of oppression. Discrimination as an institution, structural inequality, and the invisible lines ingrained in education and the economy. In the US and many other countries, these are undeniable realities. But why does the effort to make discrimination visible sometimes lead to division? For instance, when a person is labeled a perpetrator solely based on their skin color or gender and loses the right to speak. Or when a group is continually labeled as victims, hindering the formation of a free identity. What is visible here is a proxy war of suffering. Pain that should be resolved is amplified in the name of someone's anger or justice, creating further suffering. The reason I speak about this is that modern society's conflict structure mirrors a cycle of reincarnation, perpetrator and victim, white and black, justice and evil. No matter how much we discuss these, as long as the concept of an enemy exists in our hearts, it will never end. I make this vow. In this dialogue, I will not place you on the side of justice. Conversely, I will not place you on the side of the enemy either. What I will offer is not justice, but perspective. Let us re-examine the complexity of the history of discrimination and theories through the lens of the mind's mechanisms, to understand what suffering arises there and where the possibility of liberation lies. What you may gain in the time ahead could be the courage to let go of anger, or it might be the words to redefine yourself. But one thing is certain, even if you find someone's enemy, your suffering will not end. In today's society, everyone has an opinion. Open an SNS screen and you'll find someone shouting, someone countering, and someone staying silent. Discrimination, privilege, identity, historical responsibility, all these words fly around, stirring people's emotions. Critical race theory is also at the center of this storm. Originally, it was a legal and sociological framework developed to make the structures of institutional racism visible. By criticizing and theorizing how white-centric values have been embedded in laws and educational systems, it aimed to expose invisible power dynamics. However, when this theory became mainstream, problems arose. There's the dissatisfaction of those labeled as perpetrators. There's the anger of those shouting, "Our suffering is not understood." Both sides assert their justice, but conversations fail to connect. and countless wars of words unfold daily. What's the essence of this chaos? As I see it, it's a fixed self-identity. Once people see themselves as victims, they need someone to blame. Conversely, those labeled as perpetrators rush to self-defense by denying this label. But think carefully. Is there a perfect victim or a complete perpetrator in this world? From the Buddha's perspective, everything exists through dependent origination. Individual actions and social structures don't exist in isolation. Countless causes and conditions intertwine to create the present moment. That simplicity of labeling, because you are white or because you are a person of color, misleads us from the reality. Race, gender, class, nationality, all these are merely provisional names. But when we give essence to those provisional names, we truly enter the forest of confusion. Now around you there may be voices urging, take our side. But if those voices whisper, hate the enemy, I would say this: that's not wisdom. It's a chain of suffering. My name is Gautama Buddha. This too is merely a temporary name given to me by the times. People often ask, are you a god? I have denied this. I am simply an awakened one, a person who understands the structure of suffering and has found a way to transcend it. In the era I lived, there indeed was discrimination in Indian society. It was institutionalized under the name of the caste system, binding people to the classes of Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, as if it were their destiny. I strongly challenged the ideology that one's fate is determined by birth. A person's worth is not in their blood, it is by their actions that they are deemed noble. I asked, who is a true Brahmin? One who is without anger, does not resort to violence, is without greed, and speaks the truth. That is a true Brahmin. This thought touches on the core of critical race theory in the modern era. When aggressiveness or privilege is attributed to one's origin, it creates a fixed identity in a reverse sense. I preached anatta, no self. There is no enduring self within humans. We are a bundle of the five aggregates: form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, which are in constant flux. Thus, one must not confine themselves with concepts like being white, being black, being a victim, or being an oppressor. It is this fixed self-awareness that is the breeding ground of suffering. Moreover, I taught dukkha. All existence in this world does not go as one wishes. That is the fundamental suffering. And what gives rise to this suffering is craving, attachment. If people today, in the name of justice, cling to anger against their enemies, this is nothing but craving. To escape suffering, one needs the wisdom to create no enemies and let go of anger. I believed this, and thus I renounced, spoke, and continued to walk my path. And now, once again, I speak. When you find an enemy, are you truly free? The greatest achievement that critical race theory has brought to modern society is the visualization of structures. Racism is not merely a matter of personal prejudice, it is deeply embedded in institutions, culture, and language. This insight is indeed sharp and has opened the eyes of many. However, the sharpness of this insight has also become a blade, dividing people. Being white is considered a symbol of privilege. It is assumed to come with unconscious biases, demanding awareness and reflection. Meanwhile, people of color are allowed to express anger and dissatisfaction in the name of justice as heirs of historical suffering. The danger of this construct lies in the fixation of the self. In Buddhism, attachment is clinging to the illusion of self. When one says, I am a victim or I am oppressed, their suffering is not alleviated but rather reinforced. This is because they believe their existence is defined by others' actions and societal structures. It internalizes a structure of suffering that says, I cannot change. I spoke of non-self. That is the truth that Nietzsche. You are an entity capable of change here and now. Skin color, the environment of birth, and historical weight, all are mere phenomena. If one is bound by these phenomena, liberation from suffering will not occur. So what can be done? Firstly, when you unleash your anger on society as a victim, does that anger fuel your heart and cast others as enemies? Secondly, when labeled as a privileged individual, do you close your heart to protect yourself and respond with the weapon of silence? What I speak of is the path of being both and neither. In other words, the middle way, a way of being that transcends extreme assertions and dichotomies, softly open. Applying this path to modern society means having the courage to let go of labels related to race and adopting a compassionate perspective that does not define others as aggressors or victims. It is not necessary to completely reject critical race theory. However, if it is upheld as the sole truth and all conversations converge onto it, what awaits is a division driven by good intentions. Now, let me pose a question. What would you think? At a university, a white student feared that their words might hurt someone, so they remained silent during discussions. Meanwhile, students of color felt an invisible oppression in the space, bearing the weight of expressing themselves. Who in this scenario is free and who is not? And who grants or deprives that freedom? This is an invisible battlefield spreading throughout modern society. Everyone feels misunderstood, while simultaneously guarding themselves by thinking they must be cautious with others. In the pursuit of freedom, they choose the unfreedom of silence. This is one form of the dilemma created by critical race theory. But here is the question I want to raise. Do you truly wish to be on the side of justice? This is not a provocation. I simply wish to gently shake the anger, guilt, and attachment to rightness within you. In my teaching, actions are defined by intention. In other words, it's not what you did, but rather with what heart you did it, that creates consequences. When you speak against discrimination, if those words are born of anger, they will fuel conflict. Yet if the same words are spoken with compassion, they become a source of healing. Here lies another dilemma. Can you speak of justice without anger? Many modern movements are fueled by anger. It's a force for progress, but also a flame that can consume individuals. So, is justice without anger possible? Beyond critical race theory, is it possible to confront structures without creating enemies? I ask you, a battle without enemies, is it realistic or just an illusion? And is there a way to raise your voice without creating an enemy within yourself? There is no right answer to this question. However, the act of considering it is already a step away from suffering. Modern technology unintentionally expands the structures of discrimination, hiring decisions made by algorithms, biases in facial recognition systems, and preconceptions hidden within AI-generated texts. All these unconsciously perpetuate prejudice. The rising attention towards critical race theory is fueled by vigilance against this reproduction of invisible power. Who collects the data? Who designs the models, and how the world is defined? These cannot be detached from coordinates like race, gender, and class. Yet I also wish to ask, does truly fair technology exist? Technology always reflects the human heart. In Buddhism, there's the concept of form is emptiness, emptiness is form, meaning matter and mind are inseparable. The AI you create inevitably contains shadows of your attachments, ignorance, and fears. In this era, we are overly captivated by the illusion of neutrality. Absolute neutrality does not exist. That's why I advocate for selfless observation. When AI attempts to understand humans, it does so through the process of categorization. To prevent these categorizations from becoming breeding grounds for discrimination, designers need a perspective that dissolves boundaries. For example, instead of labels like white or black, Design centering on questions like, is this person suffering? Or, what are this person's desires? Would be programming with compassion. The same applies to education and media. Teaching past discrimination accurately differs from imposing an eternal guilt on someone. To utilize the pain of history for the future, we need translation of empathy, rather than records of anger. So I wish to say this: equality in the future is not about judging enemies, but about technologies that blur boundaries. This conversation pertains not only to AI, but also to the design of our own hearts. To those who stand at the boundaries, do not fight, but unravel. From the single point you unravel, the future begins to change. Quietly close your eyes. What speaks to you from within? Is it the flame of anger, a voice of righteousness, or perhaps doubts and exhaustion you can't share with anyone? Around the term critical race theory, there are always voices. Speak up, don't be silent, fight, awaken. But amid this clamor, I have always asked one thing: is your own suffering being quietly observed? Discrimination indeed exists outside, in structures, in systems, in history. But how we feel that pain within ourselves, how we nurture it, and how we project it onto others, unless we pay attention to this, the cycle will never end. I sat under the Bodhi tree not to speak, but because I knew that in silence lies the truth that cannot be spoken. When you feel anger towards something, when you see the shadow of harm in someone's words, actions, or silence, please just observe the tremor behind those feelings. That is your wound. That is your prayer. It is proof of your true desire to connect. I am skeptical of words because I know that words in the name of justice can tear people apart. I am aware that the banner of anti-discrimination can suddenly become a blade that condemns others. That is why silence is necessary. Silence is not refraining from saying something. Silence is the mental space that doesn't cut others off. What critical race theory couldn't speak of may be this unspoken suffering. If at this moment your heart can quietly unwind, without blaming others or blaming yourself, you might feel we can live together. Please don't forget that feeling. Truth always resides beyond silence. To you who have listened this far, let me ask once more. Do you have a way to confront discrimination without creating an enemy? If your answer is no, then let me share the wisdom I hold in my hands. It is a strategy of compassion that does not use anger as its fuel. In the past, I taught the noble eightfold path: right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. These are not merely moral codes, they are a map for living, showing how to maintain your heart and actions amidst chaos. If we translate this into modern terms, it would be 1. Right view. Look at racial issues from the perspective of interdependence rather than anger. Focus not on who is to blame, but why things are the way they are. See not just individuals, but the causality of structures, histories, and emotions. 2. Right speech. Choose words for dialogue, not condemnation. Your voice is meant to connect, not silence. Calm your mind before speaking. 3. Right action. If your actions are based on anger, they will inevitably cause suffering. Do not make someone your enemy in the fight against discrimination. Examine if compassion underlies your actions. 4. Right thought. Have the courage to examine the biases within yourself. Discrimination does not exist solely in others. The thought, "I am not understood," also contains seeds of suffering within you. These are not immediate solutions, but I believe they are the only strategy to enact change without creating enemies. It is fine to participate in social movements or raise your voice, but before doing so, challenge yourself with the following questions. Are these words excluding someone? Do these actions truly connect to the future? If your actions bring peace to even a single person's heart, that is already a true revolution. Instead of fueling the fire of anger, light the flame of reassurance. That is the choice for those who use compassion as their strategy. Now that we've exhausted words, silence returns like a beach after a great wave recedes. In this world, we are driven to make declarations. Express your stance. Silence is complicity. Speak out. Raise your flag. With every such demand, hearts are torn apart, blaming and testing one another. Yet, I believe this. There are things that can only be conveyed without words. For instance, sitting silently beside someone in pain, not turning away from someone's mistake, but quietly witnessing it. Avoiding self-righteousness, refraining from anger towards others' immaturity, and simply empathizing with our shared human pain. These are all unspoken acts. And these are the deepest forms of compassion. Don't create enemies. This statement is not an indulgence. It is the most challenging endeavor and, simultaneously, the only path to liberation. Eradicating discrimination in our society is not easy. Anger will arise, that's inevitable. But anger must not remain your voice. Within the silence, the small question arises: what do I truly want? This is not justice, but a wish. A simple wish that everyone can live with dignity. In this, there is no enemy or ally. There is only the choice to live together. I urge you to take this silence with you, the heart before words, the gaze before defining an enemy. It might hold the power to dissolve even the deepest rooted discrimination. I offer my deepest gratitude to you for listening so intently. You have not merely listened. You have faced this era, this subject, and this perspective with unwavering attention. And for that, I hold profound respect for your spirit. I have always said, the biggest misunderstanding about critical race theory is that it creates enemies. Facing discrimination and confronting history without denying them, while seeking a path that doesn't necessitate enemies, is neither indulgence nor escapism. It is a form of courage called compassion. The philosophies of selflessness and interdependent origination that I once preached are still relevant today. No matter how complex the structure or deep the divide, if viewed as something that can change, there is potential for renewal. If today, even for a moment, you felt there was no need to blame, then a new perspective has already begun to blossom within you. I do not believe this video has erased anyone's anger. However, if it has served as a clue to transform that anger into something different, I would call that a significant connection. There are still things I wish to express. There are still sufferings I want to unravel. If this discussion resonated with your heart, please join me for the next dialogue. Thank you for being part of this moment, and may wisdom and compassion guide your future choices. I quietly pray for this. From here on, let's take a step back and continue this conversation as if we're simply talking with each other. The biggest misunderstanding about critical race theory is that it creates enemies. How did that statement make you feel? Perhaps some of you felt a sense of unease. The reality of discrimination isn't that simple. And you're right. Reality is complicated, the wounds are deep, and often raising one's voice can be a life-threatening situation. Yet when I said, don't create enemies, I wasn't suggesting that anger is wrong. I want each person to move beyond anger and return to the question of, how do we connect? I don't know your experiences, but if you've ever suffered, that puts us on the same ground already. From here, this is where your own thinking process continues. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments section. Whether you feel empathy, discomfort, or have questions, it's all welcome. If you have any rebuttal to my words, I'd like to hear it, because that's what awakening through dialogue truly is. And if someone around you is struggling with this theme, consider passing this video to them gently. There's someone here who is not your enemy. It takes time to heal historical wounds. However, the perspective we've thought about together today should bring about some change in your own behavior somewhere along the line. There is a quiet way of fighting that changes the world without being intoxicated by justice, without drowning in anger. This series will continue for quite some time. If you ever feel like hearing the voices of great figures again, I'll be here, in that place where you return. The thinking continues within you. I hope today's talk becomes that quiet flame